be.
Are these drinks and stuff in a good place, or are they? All right. Well, welcome back to Cognitive Cul-De-Sac. This is the second episode of the podcast, and this week we're sponsored by Novotropes.
Right, and I think I might add the first one that we know is titled Cognitive Cul-De-Sac, as we arrived at that.
Last time we were Fat Man Little Boy, which was off-the-cuff stuff,
right?
And I don't think it stuck. No, so
certainly not.
This time we're going to go with Cognitive Cul-De-Sac tentatively until a better, newer, fresher name presents itself.
Which it's not likely to, because Cognitive Cul-De-Sac is...
It is good.
Fresh as hell.
But if one does, we are fickle as hell, so we'll probably change.
That's a good point.
Yeah. So this is your host, James. James is a longtime member of the Major League Baseball Hall of Fame. He is also 6'3", and his favorite food is candy.
So, once again, you've presented no truths to go along with my introduction, but I appreciate that. Brandon Kieber, a man of middling height, but tall stature in a moral and intellectual sense, or so he'll have you believe.
There it is. I was going to say, that was a really nice introduction considering the bullshit I just put about you.
But the Novotrope on the wall behind us is entirely his creation. The wood is a juniper locally sourced in the state of Arizona by Papa Keeper.
That's right.
And stained very professionally, I might add, by Brandon himself.
Yes, truly. We're very proud to have it here. And hopefully you enjoy its presence and it's not quite too distracting from our antics.
No, but if you do find it too distracting, go to novotropes.com and get your own, and then use it to distract yourself from the everyday life that you live.
Yeah. All right. So this week we have discussed our topics ahead of time, contrary to last week, which was a total shit show.
Right.
And was totally off the cuff the entire time. And it was good.
I mean, as some shit shows can be.
Yes. So this week we have a couple of arguments we're going to make to each other, and we're going to see if we can get each other to say
but again,
stuff
I
and
think
fall into intellectual traps.
We
like
wanted to avoid arguments in general, right? It's just a discussion based on axioms.
Yes, that's the word we're using this week for our arguments. We're calling them axioms because it sounds way cooler.
Yeah.
Yeah. So
also, axioms are just a shared understanding, right? Like, it's a truth common to all operators within that discussion. Normally, it's a mathematical context. The axioms that you accept in mathematics are that, like, you know, if 1 equals 1, then 1 equals 1.
Right. Also in philosophy, you use axioms, right?
Yeah.
As, like, the building blocks for arguments that then rely upon those as previously cited evidence to make the theory.
Exactly.
So this week's first axiom is about compassion. So the axiom that I'm presenting is that we are now more compassionate than we have ever been, but we are less compassionate than we will ever be.
So that you're saying that the, like, projection of our overall compassion is steadily increasing.
Yes. So this comes from a theory called expanding circles of compassion, which I heard of by a man named Robert Thurman. Robert Thurman was a super interesting guy. His life is absolutely insane. Lost an eye in an automotive accident, went through a divorce, he went to Tibet and Nepal.
Was he divorced because of the missing eye, or
he gave up he renounced his Western life and went to Tibet and Nepal because of his missing eye?
Western eye or his Eastern eye? I guess it just depends on which way he was facing.
Yeah, I think he was facing north, so it was his Western eye.
Okay.
And he went and became the first American to be ordained as a Tibetan monk by the Dalai Lama. And then a couple of years later, he renounced his monkhood to marry Uma Thurman's mom. And he's still just vibing with her.
But is he Uma Thurman's dad?
No, he's her stepdad.
Wait, but so Uma Thurman has his name, right? Or did he take Uma Thurman's name?
I guess, yeah, she took... I just put that together. I didn't even think about the fact that they have the same last name until this exact moment. Yeah, her mom's name is Nina von Schlebrug, I believe. Is that how it's pronounced?
Well, probably not.
Probably not.
Almost certainly not.
Yeah, so he got his PhD. He taught Sanskrit at Harvard and Cambridge and Amherst, and just a crazy guy. So his whole theory is that We all have circles of compassion, which are groups for which we extend moral concern. And when humanity...
Moral or mortal?
Moral concern.
Okay.
So when we were cavemen and we were just starting to assemble into groups and weren't just like wandering on our own, we began to extend this moral concern for people within our close family, like your cave wife, your cave child, your cave dog, maybe. But that was it. But as we started to collect into larger and larger groups, we started... Bigger caves, basically, yeah. As was quite often the case. We started extending this moral concern for larger and larger groups. It turned into tribes, cities, nation states, allied unions, and then there is sort of a projection that goes to basically plants, animals, all life, and then potentially alien life, I guess, would be the final conclusion of that. Interdimensional alien life might be the end. I'm not sure. But the argument here is that we are somewhere along this trajectory, and that puts us at a place of more compassion than we've ever been, but less compassion.
But no matter where we are on this trajectory, that will always be true, right? That we are more compassionate than we've ever been.
Yeah, barring some like crazy catastrophe, like nuclear holocaust, in which we then revert to hunter-gatherers and start, being cavemen again, basically.
Okay, and in which case our circle would naturally shrink to the people that we're capable of interacting with.
Exactly, and today our circles are really enabled by communication technology. Mm-hmm. So, the fact that you can go online and hop onto your Facebook group for single one-armed Norwegian pool shooters allows you to extend this circle of compassion, this moral concern
to the Norwegian pool shooters that you would have never otherwise met.
Exactly, and they might be spread all over the globe.
So why is it extended to the Norwegian pool shooters before it's extended to, say, the animals of the ecosystem in which you live?
It has to do with shared values. So we tend to extend moral concern to people that we have shared values with, i.e. missing an arm, Norwegian, and shoots pool. It's harder for people to share values with non-sentient life.
But you're saying that we will eventually.
And some people do right now. I mean, there are people on, the Dalai Lama right now is, at the end of the spectrum. And he, has compassion for all life. And so it's interesting because at any one point in time, hypothetically, since cavemen, there have always been people all along this spectrum. There have always been people caring, and to this day, there's still only people caring for their tribe or their close family network. And so there's this sigma curve of where the total sum, the mean compassion of humanity is at any given point in time, and that trend is moving towards compassion for everything. This aggregate compassion quotient, if you will.
I do find, though, that maybe the case of an indigenous group that must live in harmony with its ecosystem in order to, remain alive.
That's a good point.
As having an expanded circle of compassion that isn't necessarily predicated on shared values or communicated values, at least.
So you're talking about maybe an indigenous culture that has respect for the wolf and the eagle and the owl, but then again, you also see them imbue those creatures with human-like qualities. I mean, the owl is imbued with wisdom, which we can then extend moral concern on. I mean, I'm not saying that's required, but it does.
But it seems to be based on what we've done with owls.
Yeah.
Interesting. So that, I think, does bring me to a axiom that I wanted to bring up.
Do it.
And that is, that slugs are the smartest creature.
Is that really your axiom that you're going with? That's what you landed on?
Yeah, I mean, fundamentally, they make a better use of their time and don't bother with all of this, civilization stuff that has seemingly created a lot of surface friction between, the organisms of this world.
So why the sea slug in particular?
Well, because it's got the smallest amount of neurons that allow for observable learning.
Okay.
So it can observe its surroundings and then change the way it interacts with them with only 20,000 neurons. Also, they are the largest neurons, just because I guess they're so small, or the animal itself is so small, and most of its body weight is brain, and therefore the neurons are larger than the ones in our brains.
It's like 90% neurons.
Yeah.
Okay. So that makes it the happiest?
Well, I'm thinking it's the smartest because it's like, it's optimized for doing sea slug things.
Yeah.
And it's like, I'm sure it enjoys its goings on about the seafloor. And, who are we to judge its existence as trivial or meaningless when it's, doing exactly what it's meant to?
I suppose it has control over its own niche. That doesn't mean that it's optimized for happiness.
Well, I'll say that. Well, I'm not saying that it's optimized for happiness, but what I think is true is that more sea slugs achieve their maximum potential than humans.
Interesting. How do you define the maximum potential of a human? What is
well, it's very difficult to define. For a sea slug, it's not so much because they only have 20,000 neurons.
So maybe that's what we're talking about here. Is it's easy to define sea slug stuff. It's hard to define human stuff.
Yeah.
Right. Like, I guess art and literature would be stuff that you would define, creativity, invention,
productivity,
connection.
Right? Yeah. Labor output.
That's what differs between us and sea slugs is we get to define our own maximum potential. Wouldn't you say? For some, it might be painting the Sistine Chapel. For others, it's, just supporting a family. And they're both okay. And as long as you maximize, it's how you define your own success. Sea slug success is easy to define for us.
Right. And easier to define for a sea slug because they have no other notion of success other than self-preservation.
Mm-hmm. I think we've circled in this cognitive cul-de-sac. Do you want to back out and relate that to something else?
Well, I think we can go both inward and outward at the same time.
Let's do it.
Into the notion that slugs are a part of a collective on this planet.
Okay.
All living beings are in some way or another connected to each other.
Okay, so this points to the second axiom which we're going to talk about, which is this postulation that there is a human super collective on this planet that is the sum aggregate of human individuality and thought at the time, and that my argument for this was that the human super collective strives for godliness. That is what the humans on Earth are trying to do right now. So any individual human has its own set of goals and ambitions, but this human super collective, this superhuman that is a metaphorical device, essentially, its entire goal is to become a god.
Yeah, and God being in this sense something that is entirely unrecognizable as human.
Right. So I guess the three things that the superhuman collective is trying to do is achieve the 3 O's, which is omniscience, omnibenevolence, and omnipotence, which is the 3 characteristics that we associate with any god or the god.
The idea is that the individual attains this, or the species as a whole obtains this.
So the species as a whole is trying to do that, is my thought here. I mean, have you ever asked yourself, what is humanity trying to do out here?
I mean,
what's the point of humanity?
Very recently, I've come to, I think, the understanding with myself that the only thing we're all trying to do is, mate, probably.
Right. As individuals. I agree. I mean, that is like our primary directive, is to reproduce, pass on our genes. It's a very strong instinct.
The only thing that has, survived all civilizations and different religions and moral teachings is this population growth. Mm-hmm. We've never peaked in terms of our population.
Yeah, well, we're starting to reach the limits of the viable population that can be sustained in the environment that we have.
But with the power of, technology, I think instead of augmenting ourselves to the point where we are so beyond human that we are immortal and would never procreate, we're just going to add capacity so that we can continue to
We'll
make
probably
babies.
Unlock new environments, right? That's what we're trying to do with Mars right now. The whole terraforming goal with space exploration is literally just to unlock a new environment so that we don't reach population limit.
So if humans obtain this level of godliness that we'll say, makes them immortal, then would procreation stop?
I think that it would be definitely used as a tool to make procreation more long-term sustainable. So if we had the ability to terraform a planet, you could argue that that's kind of godlike. That's a godlike power, right?
Sure. I mean, it took God, 6 days and then resting on 7 and then, It'll probably take us, slightly longer,
Slightly
but
longer. So if we were
doing
able
it
to,
on any level is certainly impressive.
if we were able to do that within a couple hundred years, the end result is going to be the same. What it is really just doing is unlocking a new platform for us to continue to reproduce, follow these base level goals for humanity, for individuals to continue to reproduce and follow that instinct. So my whole postulation is that humanity as a whole is literally just trying. So we see this in like technological fields, in medical technology, in communication technology. We are doing our best to become omniscient through intelligence collection and dissemination, which is the internet. Omnibenevolence, which is through this expanding circles of compassion that we just talked about, and omnipotence through technological mastery. Controlling matter around us, and it's all just to continue to be able to reproduce, which is kind of depressing.
I mean, or not. Like, that's what we're wired to find fulfillment in doing in many ways, right? Like, a lot of people say it's generally a happy experience to procreate and witness that offspring.
So that raises an interesting question. What does it mean for a civilization to reproduce? Right? So once we get to the point where we're ready to start colonizing new planets and put more people on them, is it just like a viral growth of the human genome, and you would characterize humanity as more of a virus? Or is this more of a civilization birthing new civilizations type regime?
I mean, I would say that in order for a civilization to be regarded as like or species to be regarded as like an entire civilization, you really need to, fundamentally, like, get rid of all dissension from the collective.
I think that it would optimize the collective's objectives to not have dissenters.
Well, then anybody pursuing the ends of the collective would have to then eliminate anyone.
Or provide paths to finding their way to parity, to synchronicity with the collective's objectives.
So it's assimilation or extermination for those that aren't in the collective.
Or isolation. So Ray Bradbury explores this concept a lot in his sci-fi, where humanity ends up sort of gaining technological mastery over spaceflight, and then fractures into different subsets. So you'll have these like hollowed out asteroids with people that get to go there, and all of these people are like artists. Or you'll have entire like sub-civilizations, and humanity kind of like finds itself. Everybody can find that place, that collective that they identify with the most. And so in a way, it is like a civilization fracturing or birthing itself, almost like asexual reproducing into lots of subcomponents, new sub-civilizations.
So what I think we see with the internet is that people create communities like that online. And it seems to suggest then that before any sort of totality is reached as far as a collective's, membership goes, it will fracture. Mm-hmm. Implying that there will never be a species-wide collective capable of obtaining those absolute goals of omnipotence and omnibenevolence. And
yeah, and it comes down to how do you define omnipotence. I mean, you can get real good at stuff, but you're never
right. You
be
need to have a unitary definition for it, decided by the collective. And if there's anyone outside of the collective, they likely have a different definition of omnibenevolence, and that contradiction would then defeat the entire collective.
Right. I mean, that's a good point, but it also raises the question. So as we gain access to more technology and we become closer and closer to a post-scarcity civilization, and a post-scarcity civilization is this concept of a civilization that has so much access to technological power that all scarcity is gone. Food is no longer a question. Everybody has access to clean water, perfect healthcare. Nobody has to go to work. And as we approach this more and more, is it possible that individual human consciousnesses will become more aligned with what is possibly you could characterize as an ultimate truth, right? I mean, we could sit here and
The members of the collective could, for sure.
Right, definitely. So I think that if you give it enough time and you give people enough access to information and resources, most people are going to find themselves automatically narrowing in on the truth that exists, right? The objective truth of how the universe exists.
Well, not the objective truth, but the collective truth.
Which should approach the objective truth.
But never will.
Approach. I never said land on.
Sure.
I mean, it's like an asymptotic approach. You get closer and closer. You get half as close each year until you're essentially there.
So I know you recently read Aragon.
Yeah, I reread that recently. It was amazing.
Mm-hmm. So you know how like elves in that lore are generally immortal?
Yep.
And for that reason, don't have kids super often.
Right.
And like even a 70-year-old elf is like pretty juvenile.
Yep.
But the actual like children, there's like what, 2 that come up in the book, and they're like 12 and 14 years old or something, and they are revered by the rest of the elven people.
Mm-hmm.
And I think that's largely because they are not yet a part of that collective, right? They have like an external perspective from the normal goings on of elvish life and are more in touch with an actual objective reality rather than a collective one.
Yeah, I suppose they're sort of novelties. They're like, oh, look at these youngins that don't have it all figured out yet. And it's kind of fun for them to witness and be a part of that journey for them. But it also raised an interesting question. So one of the reasons that elves in Aragon don't have kids very often is because they have essentially reached post-scarcity. And this is something you actually see in developed countries on Earth with humans.
And
right
godliness.
Now.
They
godliness.
are relatively, omnipowerful,
yeah.
omnibenevolent.
Mm-hmm. Right now, in developed countries, in more developed countries, you see lower reproduction rates in the populace. And the big question to that is why. I mean, you go to a third world country, and it's kind of antithetical and counterintuitive. You would expect the people with less access to resources to be trying to distribute them more equitably and therefore have less offspring. But that's not the case. So why is it that as we achieve post-scarcity, we have less offspring?
Well, and I think it's because we don't have any sort of... We're less fearful of our mortality, right? Like in countries where you're not necessarily like guaranteed to make it to 50 years old, like you're gonna
and infant mortality,
right? So both of those kind of factor into, and I think further the point that if humans achieve on an individual level such technological, power that they are omnipotent, omnibenevolent, and
omniscient.
Yeah. Then they'll cease to procreate.
Or it will drop dramatically to the point where you have like 1, maybe 2 kids in your whole life. And
I mean, that's what we're at now.
Yeah.
That's like the normal rate for just college educated people in like the Western world.
So if every couple has 1 child, then the population will begin to decrease by a factor of 2 eventually.
Right.
So that's
unless people
trend.
are immortal.
Right, but there's no such thing as true immortality.
Well, we're talking about the omnipotent, omnibenevolent, omniscient
and that's
individual.
one of those things where you're going to approach it asymptotically, but you're never going to achieve it because, neutrons decay eventually. We think. We've never actually witnessed it, but we suppose that in 70 trillion years, neutrons are going to begin to decay, and black holes themselves, through
Hawking
radiation are going to start to decay, and then eventually we'll be left with a infinite entropy universe. I mean, there's no civilization there. There's no intelligence in that universe.
Sure. So that seems to be,
exist.
and also at the end of a cul-de-sac, so we might want to back out of the heat death of the universe.
That's a heavy topic for sure.
And I do think, as we're talking about these humans and elves reaching levels of omnipotence and whatever, I think you had something to say about the efforts being made to genetically further us towards a end.
So this is super interesting. Recently, a Bush administration furlough on...
Which Bush?
I think it was the second.
Okay.
Yeah, Junior. And there was a furlough on medical research involving human-animal hybrids. These are more commonly known as chimeras, from the Greek myth of the chimera, which is was this crazy monster that was like a lion with a goat and a snake. And this has actually now become a possibility, a medical possibility, and we're starting to explore it more and more because there's massive benefits.
I've seen glow-in-the-dark pigs before.
Have you? Did you see them in the dark?
Well, not. It was like a video, but yeah, it was like literally pigs that had some jellyfish genome that made them bioluminescent.
So yeah, that is chimera. Specifically, what was, and I do believe that to some extent that pure interspecial genome transiting is never been truly illegal. What has been recently made less illegal is doing it with humans. So one of the biggest.
So you're saying I could glow in the dark soon?
Your children could. I mean, you can't really. At this point, we're still having a hard time fully modifying every genome in a human body, just because it's really hard to get into every cell and change it fundamentally, and it's also super
right. So you don't have to do it like in utero.
Yeah, exactly. So one of the big benefits here is organ farms. Okay, so right now, when somebody needs an organ from a donor, they have to wait for somebody to die in a way that didn't damage the organ, and then you have to collect it super fast. And then you have to have good insurance, obviously, if you're in the United States, or be in the right place at the right time. And then maybe you get that, and if it's compatible and your body doesn't reject it, and the anti-rejection drugs work, then you have a new organ. But it's a really complex process. It's inefficient, and there are rumors that some countries are even doing stuff like human organ farms.
So you're saying that like I could, buy some golden retriever that has kidneys that I could, take.
So you probably wouldn't want to do it with a golden retriever because then it's even worse morally, I suppose, because we like dogs more. But I mean, yeah. So what they're saying right now is that pigs are a good candidate for this.
Pigs are arguably, as cute as dogs. We probably have more pigs domesticated than dogs.
Yeah, they're not quite as domesticated though. They're less domesticated, and they're less domesticated to optimize for happiness.
Sure. I have heard, though, and this might be related, that pig meat is the closest to human meat.
Exactly, baby. So, in the future, we might see organ farms where human organs are grown inside of pigs. Now, the danger in this is that if you didn't know what you were doing, you could potentially imbue the pig with some amount of human intelligence. Seems
like a way easier way to get swine flu, too, if you, take a kidney that's been living in a pig and put it in your body.
Maybe, yeah. I don't know. But so the whole reason I bring this up is because this is arguably a technological advancement, right? This is a potential technology that could really drastically reduce unnecessary mortality in people with organ failure. But it is also arguably a regression in terms of morality for human beings, right? So it's one step forward in one domain, and it's one step backward in another domain. So it raises the question, if we are trying to, in all of these domains, progress to the state of godliness, how do you weight individual domains, and is it okay to temporarily step back in certain domains like morality if it progresses you in another domain like technological? It's a tough question, and people are wrestling with this. And
we'll have to ask the collective court.
Yeah, or the pigs.
So is the collective court Twitter, or is it some sort of representative?
That's a good argument, actually. Social media is sort of a good representation of collective consciousness. It's weird, and there's like echo chambers in certain platforms are doing weird stuff to compartmentalize it and make people think that they're interacting with the collective.
There's definitely only like certain demographics of people on Twitter.
Birds, mostly.
Right.
Yeah. That's the big problem.
Twitter, it's for the birds.
It's Twitter, it's for the birds, baby. So yeah, these are the questions that we that I'm presenting today. Is it okay? And you also have to understand that nothing is permanent. When you take a step forward in one domain and take a step backwards in another, maybe in 100 years or 20, 50 years,
you make pig organ farms illegal, and then
because we can now grow them in vats, right? And this actually raises the argument that it might be a necessary step to get to the point where we are able to do it without any suffering. So
why wouldn't you just clone yourself, except like a brain dead version of yourself?
Okay.
but just have it hooked up to life support.
It's a good question.
And then, as needed, take out pieces.
Yeah.
Until.
This has been, a question for a long time, actually.
But you avoid the whole chimera thing, and then you don't have to, compromise your.
I would say it's arguably easier to not imbue a pig with human intelligence than to remove intelligence from a human, right? Especially if the human, neurochemical system is requires some amount of brain activity to properly grow the organs up until the point where you harvest it.
Yeah.
I mean, some amount of brain activity is going to be going on. How are you sure that there's not a dreaming being happening?
All of it, regardless of whether they're grown in, humans or pigs or what bats, all of this is to say that we want to have available, basically on shelves, organs.
Right.
So do you think that would result in people having a total disregard for their own safety? If they're if I, jump off this building and break my everything, I'll just, get my brain plopped into a new body and be good to go.
Could be. I mean, there's already people doing that right now without the technology to heal them.
Is that in any way a advancement of any sort of compassion if it potentially makes us more dismissive of our own health and wellness?
That's a good question. So I suppose you would have to define self-compassion here. And if it's not an inconvenience technologically to regrow a new body and put your brain into it, there's going to be energy demands. But, if we're post-scarcity in terms of energy production, go for it. If that's how you seek your thrills and you love just jumping off buildings and it literally doesn't detract from the social good at all to do that, I would say then you're probably entitled.
But either way, those brains are not evolved to let their organs die and to feel that pain over and over and over again.
Yeah, it would still suck.
So I would say that invites a sort of masochism in the human psyche that we're not built for, and is probably not super compassionate towards the self.
Yeah,
it erodes those circles of compassion from the inside out, as opposed to never expanding it. It just starts to eat away at it, right?
So we've been talking about the implications and potential sociological implications of immortality for a long time now, and it raises a good question. If you are truly immortal,
we'd be talking about it for longer if we were immortal.
That's a good point. Potentially forever.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. I don't have an answer. Honestly, I think that it's worth the risk, and going down that path we'll just have to figure out those problems as we get to them.
Well, let me then get into the solution of the Luddites, which is to...
What's a Luddite again?
Just somebody who doesn't want to go down that path, or any path.
Somebody who's anti-technology.
Yeah.
Yeah.
And maybe I'm not, necessarily going to compare the Amish to a sea slug, although I might have just now.
I don't think it would matter if you did, because they would never hear it.
This is a digital medium, I suppose.
Digital media.
But, they're doing Amish things. They live a life that is, befitting their body's advancement in terms of what they are capable of producing and laboring for and achieving together as a collective.
Right.
And, are generally down for that.
I'm also willing to bet that if you had if you handed them, assigned a miracle healer that was secretly an android to every Amish community, they would have no qualms with receiving free perfect healthcare whenever one of their kids almost died. Fear of mortality is pretty ubiquitous.
Yeah.
There are groups that would deny it and would rather die because they have deep-set belief in
there are
salvation. You never get to see God if you're immortal. Think about that.
Right, and there are those religions, Jehovah's Witnesses, for instance, that specifically prohibit blood transfusions, even though I'm sure it's not out of any sort of,
scientific
disbelief
basis.
in the science, but rather just a
archaic rule that they're still following.
Or just a notion that it is fundamentally wrong to put other person's blood inside your body.
Based on some archaic principle that has been passed down for generations and has no scientific basis. or a scientific basis that was relevant at the time when blood diseases were hard to detect, and that has now held over into modern day society despite advancements.
I'm no Jehovah's Witness, but I want to first label the slug as a evolutionary Luddite.
Okay.
You know, like it's probably just achieved perfection for what it does, right? You know,
baby,
it's
like
crawling, it's trolling the seafloor for those like sweet planktons and algae and just fucking munchins.
Yeah.
Munches.
Yeah.
All day. But in regards to the Luddites of human nature, how is their solution any less graceful than the transhumanist point of, you know, omnipotent individuals?
I think that they have every right to follow that. I'm not saying that the human collective should prevent them from being able to carry out their will. All I'm saying is that give it a couple thousand years and a couple environmental pressures that they're unequipped to handle, and they're going to just self-select out of the gene pool.
Do you think the Amish existence is generally less stressful than your own?
In some ways, it's way more stressful.
How so?
Well, the back-breaking labor constantly, the high risk of child mortality, definitely.
Don't you work like 80 hours a week?
Yeah, that's true. But I guess, yeah, you got me there, you son of a bitch. Yeah, no, I'm a hard worker for sure, and I'm not saying that lack of work is an ideal. All I'm saying is that the nature of the work can be simplified and made more efficient. So all Amish are essentially is just people with regulations against efficiency, essentially. And it comes
is
at their
that
own
so that
expense
they
in many
never
ways.
achieve a post-scarcity society?
I don't know if that's why they do it. In fact, I'm sure that they would be happy to have more plentiful harvests and to work less hard and have stronger children and healthier babies and stuff like that. I think a lot of it's caught up in religious doctrine.
So let me ask then, what replaces labor in a post-scarcity society?
It's labor of love. So
like art?
Yeah. A lot of people will just choose to do art. A lot of people
So
will
are you
become
claiming
hedonists.
then that the Amish are anti-art?
That's a straw man argument, and I'm absolutely not claiming that. I'm saying that in a post-scarcity civilization, this is a big question that people ask a lot. And I think it's a good question because generationally, it is very relevant. We imbue children with certain types of work ethic when they're young, especially in capitalism. Like, you got to do work, man. Like, if you're idle hands,
what do you want to be when you grow up?
I want to be an explorer, a space explorer. Honestly, that's my ideal.
You know, my earliest known occupation that I wanted to have for myself was a cartographer.
Sweet, man.
But Google Maps put them all out of work. So, before I entered the labor pool.
There are still cartographers that just use the more efficient tools now. It's narrowed the work field for sure, but I think once space exploration achieves a more godly level, we're going to have more use for cartographers. I mean, we're going to have 1 million unmapped worlds, and we're going to send you out there, and you're going to get access to satellites, and those are just really good cartographer tools, right? And we're going to have more use for that. So there's still going to be a need for work and labor, but it's going to get to be more of a selective nature. Like, what do I want to do versus what do I have to do to survive?
Yeah, and I think there's a chance to imbue certain sorts of work with an artful touch, like cartography, for instance. You know, you can put little
Dragons,
details on the maps,
serpents,
and whatnot,
and the seas.
Right, yeah. Exactly. But there are certain types of work that are completely unable to integrate with art in any sort of way, like a coal miner, for instance. There's no artful way to swing a pickaxe.
I think that you just offended and possibly disenfranchised an entire subset of our market demographic. But,
coal miners?
Yeah. Who knows? Maybe they're really big in the podcast. I don't know that. I mean, I think that there's probably definitely less room for artistic expression in certain industries, and those will probably be the ones that get automated first and get evacuated first. So your coal miners will now be like, you know what? I'm going to spend a couple of years chilling, right? Because now we have universal basic income, and I don't have to go put my body at risk every day and my kid's body at risks, We don't have like child coal miners anymore. They get to spend the time growing up and learning how to integrate into a post-scarcity civilization. The parents get to spend a couple of years chilling. Maybe they never go back to work. That's okay. And that's what I was saying about the generational thing is for post-scarcity to not ruin a bunch of people's lives because they feel like they are now purposeless, you're going to have a generational shift in mindset. And that's going to require generational die-offs. So like people who are born to believe that there's nothing other than work are probably going to be a little bummed out for the rest of their life, but then they're going to pass, but their kids are going to understand that this is now a new paradigm. And this
is what the collective does now, and if you break
does.
from it, then you're doomed to a life of meaninglessness.
Sure, yeah. And there's more opportunity to find fulfillment in different ways than there were previously. I mean, we've been doing this, 1,000 years ago. Like if we went back in time and talked to like a Aboriginal farmer, he'd be like, "What do you mean you don't spend 6 hours a day farming your fields? Like, how are you happy with your existence?" And we're like, "Well, I do artwork on Deviant Art all day," and he'd be like, "That sounds super unfulfilling," right? So it's like a subjective thing, and it's unfortunate that it's so built into us from a child age, but it does present good opportunities for future generations. And that's all I got to say about that.
About future generations.
I mean, in an ideal world, my post-scarcity wet dream, if that's okay to say.
Yeah, I mean, it's been said.
My dream is to have a spaceship, an exploration vehicle, and to go travel the cosmos and just look at cool stuff and document interesting phenomena. I mean, I always really identified with the the clipper ship explorers of the earlier days when cartographers still had work to do. And now that all of the domains on Earth, almost all domains have been explored, mapped, the final frontier really is space. And so everything I do is in an attempt to establish that as a possibility for me and for future generations. I'd like people to be able to just take off on a ship alone for a couple of months, go see some crazy new nebula formation, watch a star explode, and then come back and, kick it and share what they saw with everybody. And that's my ideal.
So what circle of compassion are you not considering in devoting yourself to that?
I don't know if I am excluding any circles of compassion. Am I? I mean, I'm not telling you I'm necessarily going to eat pork and beef. Maybe I'm going to eat vat-grown steaks while I'm out there, I think that, you don't have to dedicate your life to a specific circle of compassion for it to be a valid life. I think that as long as you hold those circles of compassion close to your heart, then that's a life well spent.
Wasn't there the notion that the circles of compassion, like you can extend them out as far as to infinity, right?
Probably.
To all matter, for instance.
Right.
And in that case, is it uncompassionate to mine metal from the earth?
I don't think so. I mean, if it depends on your...
the earth is a super organism, then right. Wouldn't any sort question. Of disturbance of natural world be downright evil?
This is something that Buddhists have been dealing with for thousands of years, because you can dedicate your entire life to reducing suffering, but you can be walking down your garden path and accidentally step on 10 ants. I mean, there's only a certain amount of care and attention you can give to reducing suffering before it becomes debilitating.
So are you familiar with the Kingdom of Bhutan?
No.
It's Himalayan country. Nepal's next door neighbor.
Okay.
They have the highest gross national happiness.
Ooh, GDH.
And they have the lowest amount of TVs per capita, I think.
Interesting.
And they are in many ways Luddites, and they restrict travel into their country. They don't want to have a lot of tourists. It's really difficult to get a visa to go there. But they are and seem to be happier than anyone. Mm-hmm. In not a North Korea, oh, everyone's happy, what are you talking about way, but a genuine sort of Buddhist Luddite paradise.
Right.
And so I'm wondering then, like, why bother with omnipotence if every generation will only be dissatisfied with what the next generation is doing, instead of just settling down on something that everybody can agree to and what is currently accessible?
I am all for the Luddite paradise, but I think that you have to allow people to choose to be there. Everybody's built differently, man. You know, if somebody finds happiness and complacence in lack of technology, then I think that they should spend their time doing that. As long as they're not restricting travel out of that country and keeping people prisoner like North Korea, then I'm super for it. And I think that there's a lot to say for it because it's easy to become overwhelmed with Western civilization. I mean, it's super cutthroat. Watching the television, most people spend time watching television in a way that does not contribute to their happiness. I mean, they're actively giving their attention to people who are trying to drum up unhappiness in order to assure continued viewership. So I think that's, until we get a hold on responsible ways of using technology, I think that there's a good case to be made
For not using it at all.
For not using it at all if it's really messing with you. I mean, I don't watch Fox News or CNN ever. When I want to watch something, I'll go and watch some documentaries, some sweet nature docs. I'll watch some sea slug docs. Those are the best ones,
There's this octopus one that that's been coming up as suggested for me.
Yeah, dude, is it that YouTube channel?
Octopus Teacher or something.
Free high quality nature documentaries?
No, it's on Netflix, but
you should check this out.
Yeah.
People out there on YouTube, there is a channel called Free High Quality Nature Documentaries that I came across like a week and a half ago. They have almost 200 hour-long, super high-quality documentaries, and it's all free. And there's no ads. I don't know who pays for it. It's kind of weird.
So speaking of that exactly, have you seen the Social Dilemma documentary that's been
No, I heard it's super spooky.
put on Netflix? Yeah, I mean, it's about like the sort of behavior modification that comes about by social media.
Yep.
Talks about, generally speaking, how when the product is free, you are the product.
Exactly.
And I think, there's I certainly came to the choice of my own volition to delete social media and not be on it because I found that it was, self-destructive in many ways.
Absolutely.
And I'm wondering then, with so many technologies advancing so much faster than they ever have before, it's almost guaranteed that technology gets to market and is ubiquitous before there are any rules made about it.
Okay. Yeah, no, I agree. I think technology, especially communication technology, is advancing faster than our evolutionary brains are able to catch up. I mean, we've evolved into these small network mammals that are accessing 8 to 20, maybe 30 individuals, for the most part, for their entire life, being given access to these technologies, especially ones that are actively being designed to trigger like serotonin and dopamine dumps in your brain for their own mischievous capitalist ends. I think we're not equipped to handle that. And it might be more of a generational thing rather than evolutionary. Like, you could make the case that you could train people to be able to handle this in a responsible way. But until then, being a Luddite is a good argument. It's a good way to avoid that.
So then how will we maintain our own modest viewership if we're currently advocating for Ludditeness?
Yeah, we might need to print up a couple EPs, some vinyls of this bad boy, send them out.
Or just crop out, censor ourselves for the sake of our own capitalistic ends?
Exactly.
All right.
No, I definitely encourage people to find their own path, and if that comes against our own ends, our own desire to spread and disseminate this information, then that's the result. I mean, sometimes people make a choice that's for their own best interest that isn't aligned with yours, and I'm happy for them. So if you're not going to watch TV anymore because of this podcast, I'm sorry to see you go.
And if you're not going to watch this podcast anymore because of this podcast, we're happy to see you go.
No, you're stupid if you do that.
Oh.
It's cool and I get it, but you're wrong and I hate you. I think is my stance on that.
All right.
Yeah.
Well,
I think we're charming.
Yeah. And on that note, should we?
Has it been 15 minutes? Okay. Cool. Well, let's sign off then. This has been James.
And that's been Brandon.
And this has been sponsored by Novotropes. See you next time. Whoa.